Good afternoon. Welcome to Consular Conversations Live, where we discuss consular topics of interest to Jamaican and U.S. citizens, and you can get your answers uh, directly from a U.S. consular officer. Just a reminder to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at U.S. Embassy JA. I'm Brandon, and I'll be your moderator for today's program. As a reminder, we cannot answer any specific questions about your individual case or application in a public forum. You are entitled to privacy. Also, we do not have access to detailed case information during the program. So we would ask you to please direct any non-immigrant visa-related questions to kingstonniv@state.gov. This month's program focuses on how to qualify for a B1, B2 visitor or temporary visa for temporary visitor for business and pleasure purposes. Our guests today are Mike and Andrew. Welcome, gentlemen.
Happy New Year.
So as an introduction to our topic today for B1, B2 visas, could you please explain the purpose of a B1, B2 visa?
Sure. So the B1, B2 visa, very useful visa, actually has a variety of uses. Actually a combination of two visas, a B1 and a B2 visa, which is a visitor for business and a visitor for pleasure. You might get the B1, B2 visa if your purpose of travel entails both of those purposes. For Jamaican nationals, they're valid for 10 years, multiple entry. So they're valid for a lot of your life. Great, useful visa. And we're happy to have all those applications for those B1, B2s.
Okay, so if someone wants to travel for tourism, to see family, to go on vacation, is that the B1 or the B2?
Well, we usually prefer to give them both together, the B1, B2 combination, right? But if you're just there to see the sights, pleasure, that'll be more of a B2.
Okay, and someone traveling for business reasons, to have some meetings with some colleagues, that
Sure.
would be the B1.
That would be the B1 specifically. It's important to point out, though, that a lot of business purposes travels are covered in B1 and B2 category visas. But we always recommend you check what your purpose of travel is and use our visa wizard available on travel.state.gov, just to make sure that you're within the left and right limits of that.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So maybe you guys could start by explaining a little bit how someone can qualify for a B1, B2 visa. What are the main criteria to qualify?
The main criteria to qualify for a B1, B2 visa is to showcase that you have sufficient ties, essentially to return to your home. So, when you have an interview with a consular officer, they're going to ask you questions related to your economic, employment, family, social ties, things of this nature to determine whether you overcome the presumption of immigrant intent. And that itself is under Section 214B of the Immigration Nationality Act, is the primary qualification of the B1, B2 visa. You need to prove that you are in fact non-immigrant status while you're traveling in the United States.
Thank you. So in order to obtain the visa, someone needs to show that they have sufficient ties to Jamaica with their employment, their family, etc. So when they appear for their interview, what are some good tips to follow for the interview itself?
I'll jump in and I'll take the first one. So a good starting point, I think, is just in general terms, you want to be informed. Okay, that is the start. You want to think about your purpose of travel. And you want to understand all the rules and regulations that go into it. And I mentioned it before, you start on travel.state.gov. There's a handy tool on there called the Visa Wizard. And you have your plan, only you know the plan for your purpose of travel. So you want to go through, use the Visa Wizard, and make sure that B1, B2 category of visa is going to cover what is in your plan. Right? So you want to start with a good understanding and information about what you're going to be doing. And I will say that successful applicants, they do understand the rules of the visa, and they're able to communicate that to the consulate.
I also recommend being prepared. While not required, most successful applicants are able to establish their ties both through their verbal answers to the consular officer, but also through evidence of documentation, a job letter, if you're going up for a funeral or a death certificate, or something like this. Again, not required, but if you have them, it helps you be prepared. It helps you make your case with the consular officer.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there, so to speak, Mike, about the ties, right? So how do you demonstrate your ties to your home? Think about what are all the possible questions the consular officer might ask, and how can I show that everything in my application is true and authentic to the best of my knowledge of it. So you can think about all those documents you might have, finances, ownership of property, even sometimes your relationship, right? So qualifying relationships with your family here in Jamaica, those might be evidence of your ties. You might consider bringing those documents to you.
Great, thank you. So as you guys know, the consular officer has the right to request whatever documentation deems necessary in order to verify we will refuse the visa at the window and request some additional documentation. So when the applicant receives that refusal slip, does that mean that their visa application is denied, and in order to be able to submit the documentation, they need to reapply?
Yes, generally, what Brandon's referring to is when a visa application is currently on hold for either administrative processing or the submission of additional documents. It is technically a refusal under Section 221G of Immigration and Nationality. It does constitute as a refusal, right? However, it's not a refusal under Section 214, right? So the decision has not been made. Essentially, typically the action is upon the applicant to provide the requested documentation in order to overcome the 221G refusal in order to continue with the adjudication of the visa.
Correct, and I think generally we give applicants
And they have 1 year, their application will remain active in our system. But typically, folks respond, as soon as possible. So as soon as they want to travel.
Great, thank you guys. So I think we've covered a little bit about what the visa is for, how people can prepare for the interview. What's something that someone can make sure they do in order to maintain their eligibility for the visa class over a period of time? So that, for example, halfway through the visa validity period, or when they go to renew the visa, they don't run into any issues or any further scrutiny from Customs and Border Patrol.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like we mentioned before, typical Jamaican person, if they receive a visa, they're good for 10 years, right? A lot can happen in 10 years. Travel patterns is one of the main factors that we look at when we go to assess a visa renewal, right? And it's really not ultimately just up to the consular officer either. If you have a pattern of travel, which may kind of conflict with some of the information that the applicant put into their application, it might call into question the veracity of some of that information. It might call it into question. So usually patterns of long stays that are unexplained, that the reason doesn't essentially make sense. Some of those long stays can become problematic for travelers as they go to re-enter the United States, especially when they're interacting with the CBP officials, Border Patrol, in the United States.
Yeah, going off that, like you said, it's important that you continue to abide by the regulations of your visa class. For example, if you enter on a B2 tourist visa, you can't do any activities that would be associated with a B1. Seeking unauthorized employment in the United States on a tourist visa, for example, would be against the regulations of the tourist visa. And in addition to that,
Yeah, if I could interject one thing, something that I actually learned relatively recently was that border folks, our colleagues up there working with ports of entry, actually don't stamp a date into your passport. You actually have to check that electronically. And we're going to share the link to the I-94 website where you can do that for yourself. Just to refresh your memory, just so you make sure you don't overstay your authorized until date for your AUD. So very important link to check, especially now that we are not stamping passports anymore with those authorized until dates.
one final point as well. It is important that, of course, everyone continue to align with U.S. Laws, regulations of other any country, as well as Jamaican law here too. There are sometimes if folks who have a criminal history, or if they engage in some kind of criminal activity that would render them ineligible for their visa, even though they currently have it, could impact the validity of that.
And one of the things too, it kind of takes us back to one of the earlier things we mentioned about preparation. The cost of living in the United States can be quite high in some places. So to make sure you have enough money saved up for your travels to cover you for your entire time is very important. You don't want to hit a snag, some kind of problem, and then you're in the United States for longer than you anticipate. That could be a challenge to remaining qualified.
Great, thank you. So I think a lot of people don't know this, but the type of visa that you hold is tied to the type of activity that you'll be engaging in while you're in the United States. So a B1, B2 is very specific to the purpose for that visa. If someone wanted to go and study at a university, for example, that's something you couldn't do on a B1, B2. You'd come and apply for an F1 visa, or as an exchange visitor, etc. So some of the other things that you mentioned. So we have some questions coming in to the chat. I just want to give you guys an opportunity to respond to those.
Can I make a quick point on what you were just saying, Brandon? Sure. A lot of people hold multiple visas.
Correct.
You can hold an H visa as you're a seasonal worker in the US. You can hold a tourist visa, a B1, B2, maybe even have other visas. But it depends on what visa you show the immigration officer at the port of entry to obtain entry into the United States. That is the visa upon which you enter. So if you enter on a tourist visa, you must depart the United States again before you enter on any other visa for a different purpose of travel. For example, if you're going to work on the H visa season in the United States.
Great point. Great point. So we have a question here in the chat. Someone is asking, the consular officer did not look at my documents when I brought them in. Why should I bring documents if they're not required?
They are required. Consular officers are trained to kind of determine on whether you have ties without having to rely. Often the case we receive, as you may imagine, a lot of fake or fraudulent documents as well. So we're trained to sort of understand whether someone is being truthful with us without having to rely on paper documents. However, sometimes it is helpful for us to obtain those documents to confirm some close ties to.
Having a document with you at the interview couldn't hurt you. So why not be prepared in case the consular officer is especially factoring in or especially considering that one piece of information that only you can substantiate. It wouldn't hurt to have the documents ready, so just be prepared.
Right, so better to have it and not need
Not
it
need it, yeah.
than to need it and not have it. Okay, so we have another question here. My employer wants me to go with them to take care of their kids while on vacation. What kind of visa is that? What do I need?
Good question. There's a talk about for the B1 visa or the B1 domestic visa. So if you are currently a domestic worker, a U.S. citizen, or a foreign national that holds a U.S. visa or maybe he travels on the ESTA program, you can receive a visa to continue working for that family, for your employer, while traveling with them in the United States. There are some requirements to obtain this visa. For example, you need to see an employment contract with your employer. Identify some specific factors that are necessary. For example, we need to know that you're making a minimum wage, a U.S. minimum wage, depending on the state and county where you're going to in the United States. We need to know that your lodging, your housing, your meals will be paid for by your employer, for example. So yes, there is a carve-out for you to continue working for that family while you're in the United States.
So in addition to the employment contract, those necessary provisions, should they also submit some information about their employer's nationality and visa class?
Very helpful. Yeah. We do recommend that folks also submit maybe a photocopy of their employer's U.S. visa, or if they're traveling on ESTA, just a copy of their passport, because oftentimes we do kind of tie some of the aspects of their visa to their employer if they are only qualified for the B1 domestic visa. That would be helpful. Not required, but again, helpful to adjudicate the visa.
Thank you. So another question we have here. I was recently refused a visa. Can I apply again? Do I have to wait a certain period of time?
Unless the consular officer told you some very specific information about the reason for the refusal. Generally speaking, you are welcome to reapply at any time. One of the assumptions is it's up to you. If you feel your circumstances have changed and there's new information that's available, or your overall circumstances are improved ties, you are welcome to reapply unless the consular officer specifically said there was some form of ineligibility. In which case, you might want to gather any and all documents that pertain to that ineligibility and bring them with you to your next visa.
So for example, certain ineligibilities carry a bar on reapplication or readmission. Sometimes they vary in how long someone has to wait until they reapply.
If they hope to be successful, that's correct. Yeah. It can bring us back to a point I would like to make a little earlier. When it comes to just overall interviewing visas, you want to be honest, and you want to be clear about your circumstances. I think all of us have been living here in Jamaica and been guests here in Jamaica for long enough to understand, for instance, what levels of income makes sense, what circumstances make sense, given the rest of the information in your application. It really just benefits the applicant to be honest. Because if there's some shred of information in your application that doesn't make sense, you might start to get asked more questions about it. The next thing you know, it might call into question the credibility of all of the other information. So you want to be honest. Additionally, we understand that people are people, and so people can make mistakes. We want to know the circumstances of the various encounters with law enforcement. If you've been arrested, questioned with police, we want to have clarity and understanding what were the circumstances. So the more honest you can be and the more clear with the consular officer you can be about any of those interactions with immigration personnel, law enforcement personnel, can really help you in the case of visa.
Great, thank you.
And to your other question too about the point about someone reapplying perhaps soon after student is subjective, but if you were refused recently, so you should be prepared to answer the question. So what has changed in your life circumstances in the past month, the past 3 months, past 6 months since your prior refusal?
Thank you so much. So as you guys know, a lot of our applicants will contract a travel agency to fill out their application for them. Sometimes it's not the most user-friendly application form to use, and they'd rather let a professional handle it, or they may ask a friend or family member to help them fill it. So if there's something on the application that's not 100% accurate, and it was inputted into the application by a travel agent or by a friend or family member, is the applicant still responsible for that information provided to the U.S. Embassy?
Yes, they are. Yeah, the applicant is responsible for all of the information that's submitted on their DS-160, their application, their visa application that they submitted to us.
And to go along with that too, Brandon, plenty of folks do, in the course of their interview, they will declare that things have changed in the time between they submitted the application and when they're actually showing up for the visa. And that's no problem. The consular officer just takes that into account, makes whatever changes, and then it takes that in notes, and it's really no problem if things have changed.
Great. So we're getting a lot of questions in the chat, so I want to give you guys a chance to answer some of these. Michaela asks, if I have a crewman's visa, which is also known as a C1D visa, why wouldn't I qualify for a tourist visa?
I can take that. So really, evidence of employment is great for the purposes of employment-based visas. It's something that we actually prioritize very highly. We want to facilitate people finding jobs legally and authorized ways and getting those jobs, being able to get to their place of employment in the United States. The B1, B2 visa, like I said, lasts for a long time, lasts for 10 years. And the circumstances that qualify someone to work for a very set period of time on a work visa might not be the same considerations for a period of 10 years in the future. So that's something that the consular officer does kind of factor in when they're making these adjudications into the visa.
So two different visa classes, two different sets of requirements, and overall, the ties for the tourism visa are different than the qualifications to go work for a cruise line, for example, or an airline.
Sure. It's true. But we often see successful B1, B2 applicants that do have a demonstrated history, employment history with a C1D visa on a cruise line, for example, or H workers that are choosing to work in the United States.
Great. Thank you. So Lakeisha asks, if I already have a visa, do I need to come in for an interview again when it expires?
Good question.
Sounds like an interview waiver case to me.
Yeah. Generally speaking, if your visa has expired no more than 40 months at the time you submit your application, generally speaking, you are eligible for an interview waiver. So you can submit your documents to us. Oftentimes, we're able to adjudicate those applications without the individual coming for an interview. There are times where we will refuse individuals under Section 221G to bring up that refusal. We do require an individual to enter an interview. For example, as Andy alluded to earlier, this could see a travel pattern, for example, that perhaps hints at someone was not complying with the regulations. But generally speaking, yes.
Okay. So we have a question from Maxine. If I wasn't convicted, do I have to say that I was arrested? It was 30 years ago. I don't think it should matter anymore.
Good question. Yeah. Unfortunately, we do require any information and substantiation for any arrests. The application is very clear. Have you been arrested? Not just convicted, but arrested at any point in time. It is important to try and find those documents, any kind of proof, any kind of court document that speaks to the fact that you were acquitted of all the charges were dropped. Successful applicants, even though these events are sometimes long in the past, successful applicants are able to find court documents for those their visa. It's very important. Good question.
In addition to that, under U.S. federal law, evidence of an expungement of one's criminal record does not mean that that individual has never been arrested before or convicted. So if you have been convicted of a crime, you have been arrested, it's been expunged, you still must identify that on your application. It would be most helpful to bring and related court documents related to that.
Right. And it's not always going to lead to a refusal, correct? There are a lot of qualified applicants that have been arrested and convicted of a crime that may not lead to an eligibility under U.S. law. So I think a good rule of thumb is always to be completely honest, 100% with your application and your any prior arrests or criminal history. Because if you're not honest, that's really when you run into trouble. Because if we have information that says otherwise, an ineligibility for misrepresentation for sure. Self-out, right? So there's another question here in the chat. I am a dual American Jamaican living in Jamaica, and I want my Jamaican spouse to get a tourist visa. What should I do to help them?
Well, your spouse would qualify under her own ties to her own country. Okay. All things considered, the fact that she is married to someone that has dual nationality, that's one thing to consider. But in terms of the spouse helping out another spouse, I think your wife should be able to, or your spouse should be able to convey their own ties to the consular officer at the end, and identify those clearly on the application.
Sure. And maybe I'm missing the exact point of the question, but certainly referring your spouse to all the information available at travel.state.gov, Visa Wizard, just making sure that they are informed, prepared, honest, they stay qualified throughout the lifetime of their visa. Those are important steps that you can assist your spouse in preparation for the visa. All those information. And also reporting all the relationships you have with people in the United States is also very important, especially if they're immediate family members. There's sections in the application form which lists any immediate family members currently in the U.S. Very important to fill that out accurately.
Okay, great. So we have another question here from Ronnie. She asks, I am a U.S. citizen who accompanied my relative to the interview. Why did their application get refused when I can afford to have them travel to see me?
Yeah, that is an important question. Really, it comes back to establishing your ties to the applicants. And really, unfortunately, there are some persons who demonstrate very strong ties to the United States. Therefore, their application, unfortunately, doesn't overcome the presumption of interest. Okay, strong ties to the U.S. can, in some cases, represent too strong of a tie to qualify for a non-immigrant visa. A non-immigrant visa requires someone who demonstrates strong ties to their home. So it sounds like unfortunate circumstances, but that's part of the factors when we consider ties to some extent.
So solvency is very important. We need to be able to understand that you have enough funds to cover a trip or vacation to the United States. But another question is, as an applicant, do you have sufficient ties to your home country? That's still required in and of itself, even if you do have the funds. to support travel. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. Okay, so we have a question here. It says, what measures are in place to ensure fair and transparent application processing? What should I do if I feel that I have been unfairly denied?
I'll lead by saying that in the section, we actually do spend a lot of time normalizing, making sure the experience for all applicants is as close to being the same as possible between any consular officer that you might receive. So we do spend a lot of time. We prioritize that very heavily, make sure the experience is the same, equitable for every applicant, regardless of the consular officer.
Yeah, and if you feel like you were denied, but you do have sufficient ties to your home country, it cannot be appealed. The decision of the consular officer cannot be appealed. We encourage you to apply again, right? And for what it's worth, when we do see applicants that we have interviewed in the past or refused in the past, every one of us will send that up into a different adjudicator, because that's what's there, but there is no means of going about appealing an adjudicator's decision against in non-negative visa.
And so all of our requirements for the B1, B2 visa are listed on the website. USEmbassyJA.gov, I believe it is. We'll put it in the chat box. So if anybody has any questions about the requirements for the tourist or business visa, you can always go online to our website to get that list of requirements for yourself. Great. So I believe that brings us to the end of our session for today. I'd like to thank you for joining us to discuss B1, B2 visas, and I'd like to invite you to join us next month in August, on August 21st at 1 p.m., where we'll be discussing instructions for K visa applicants, which are fiancé visas. Thank you. Take care.